The gunshot that echoed through the parlor of her father's house wasn't aimed at her heart, but the words that followed might as well have been. Zinnia Keller stood frozen in the doorway of her family's sprawling ranch house outside San Francisco, California, her hands still clutching the letter from the stranger she'd been writing to for 6 months, as her father's face turned the color of aged leather left too long in the sun. "You've been corresponding with a man we don't know." Her father's voice boomed through the September afternoon of 1882, rattling the china her mother had brought from Boston 20 years prior. A drifter, some nobody who answered an advertisement. Zinnia's mother pressed a handkerchief to her lips, her eyes wide with horror as though her daughter had confessed to murder, rather than the simple truth of having placed a letter in the San Francisco Chronicle seeking intelligent correspondence. She was 22 years old, educated at Miss Peterson's Academy for Young Ladies, and desperately lonely in a world that seemed to offer her nothing but suitors chosen by her father, men twice her age with fortunes built on railway speculation and land grabs. "He's not a drifter," Zinnia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "His name is Zachary Keene, and he's a rancher in the Sacramento Valley. He's educated, thoughtful, and he writes about literature and philosophy and the changing landscape of California. He's more interesting than any of the men you've paraded through this house." Her father's hand came down hard on his mahogany desk, imported at great expense from the East. "You will cease this correspondence immediately. You will burn those letters. And you will accept Harold Pemberton's proposal when he makes it next month. Or I swear to God, Zinnia, you will find yourself without a home or a family." "Richard," her mother whispered, but there was no force behind it, only the weak protest of a woman who had long ago learned that disagreement led nowhere. "I won't marry Harold Pemberton," Zinnia said, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I won't marry a man who looks at me like I'm a prize mare he's considering purchasing." "Then you won't marry anyone with my blessing or my money," her father said, his eyes cold as San Francisco Bay in January. "You're cast aside, girl. If you want to love a stranger, some cowboy you've never met, then you can go do it without the Keller name or fortune behind you." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Zinnia looked at her mother, hoping for intervention, for some maternal defense, but her mother had turned away, her shoulders shaking with silent tears that Zinnia knew were more about social embarrassment than actual heartbreak. "Fine," Zinnia heard herself say, as though someone else was speaking through her mouth. "Then I'll go." She walked out of that parlor with nothing but the clothes on her back and the letters hidden in her bodice, 17 of them, each one signed "Yours in Hope, Zachary Keene." She didn't look back as she walked down the long drive lined with eucalyptus trees, didn't let herself think about what she was leaving behind until she reached the main road and realized she had nowhere to go. San Francisco in 1882 was a city transformed from the rough gold rush town of 30 years prior, but it still held danger for a woman alone with no money and no prospects. Zinnia walked until her feet ached in her fine leather boots, walked until the sun began to set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of the paintings in her father's study. She found herself in a neighborhood she didn't recognize, near the docks where the fishing boats came in, and the smell of salt and fish hung heavy in the air. A small boarding house with peeling paint and a crooked sign advertised rooms by the week. The woman who answered Zinnia's knock looked her up and down with shrewd eyes that had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "I need a room," Zinnia said. "I have no money now, but I can work. I can clean, I can cook, I can do laundry." The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Chen, studied her for a long moment, You're running from something, from someone, Zinnia corrected. From a life that wasn't mine. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, as though this explanation made perfect sense. You can stay in the attic room. You'll work 6 days a week, morning till night. Sundays are your own. Food comes with the room. Any trouble and you're out. Understood? Understood, Zinnia said, relief flooding through her so powerfully she felt her knees weaken. The attic room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, with a single window that looked out over the chaotic jumble of San Francisco's rooftops. Zinnia sat on the lumpy mattress that first night and pulled out Zachary Keene's letters, reading them by candlelight until her eyes burned with exhaustion. He wrote about the land he was trying to build into something sustainable, about the difficulty of drought and the beauty of wild mustard blooming yellow across the valley in spring. He wrote about books he'd read, borrowed from a circuit rider who came through twice a year with a saddlebag full of volumes. He wrote about loneliness, about the strange isolation of being surrounded by vast space and seeing no one for days at a time. His handwriting was strong and clear, the words of a man who thought before he wrote, who chose his phrases with care. In the morning, Zinnia woke to Mrs. Chen pounding on her door, and her new life began. She scrubbed floors until her hands were raw, washed linens until her back ached, served meals to the boarding house residents, a collection of sailors and dock workers and men down on their luck. She learned to dodge wandering hands and deflect crude comments with a sharp word and sharper look. She learned to make herself invisible when she needed to be, to take up space when it mattered. At night, she wrote to Zachary Keene by candlelight, telling him what had happened, explaining that she no longer had an address at her father's house, that letters should come to her care of Mrs. Chen's boarding house on Sullivan Street. She told him the truth because after 6 months of honest correspondence, lying seemed impossible. I have nothing now, she wrote. No family, no fortune, no prospects. If you wish to cease our correspondence, I would understand. I'm not the woman you thought I was, the daughter of a wealthy rancher with expectations and opportunities. I'm just Zinnia now, working in a boarding house near the docks, trying to figure out who I'm meant to be. She mailed the letter the next day and tried not to think about the silence that might follow. 2 weeks passed. Zinnia fell into the rhythm of her new life, finding odd satisfaction in work that produced visible results, floors that gleamed, linens that smelled of soap and sunshine, meals that filled empty bellies. Mrs. Chen was a fair employer, stern but not cruel, and she seemed to respect Zinnia's desire not to discuss her past. Then one morning, Mrs. Chen knocked on her door before dawn. Someone here to see you. Zinnia's heart jumped into her throat. Had her father sent someone to drag her home? Had he reported her as a runaway to the police? She dressed quickly and came downstairs, her hands trembling slightly. The man waiting in the boarding house's shabby sitting room was not anyone her father would have sent. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat at harvest, tied back with a leather cord. He wore simple clothes, denim trousers and a cotton shirt, boots that had seen real work, and a hat he held in his hands as he turned at the sound of her footsteps. His eyes were the color of the California sky in summer, clear blue and direct, and when they met hers, Zinnia felt something shift in her chest, like a door opening onto a room she hadn't known existed. Zinnia Keller. His voice was deep and warm, with a slight roughness that suggested someone who spent more time talking to horses than people. Yes, she managed. I'm Zachary Keene, he said, and smiled, a slow smile that transformed his serious face into something that made her breath catch. I got your letter. Thought I'd better come see if you were all right. You came all this way. The Sacramento Valley was nearly 100 miles away, 2 days of hard riding at least. Seemed like the thing to do, he said simply. Your letter made it sound like you might need a friend. I figured I could be that. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat from the doorway. I'll bring coffee. You two can sit in here, but the door stays open. Zinnia nodded, not trusting her voice, and sat in one of the worn chairs. Zachary sat across from her, his hat still in his hands, his eyes never leaving her face. I didn't expect you to come, Zinnia said finally. I thought you might not write back at all. Why wouldn't I write back? Zachary looked genuinely confused. Because I'm not who you thought I was. I'm not a suitable correspondent for a respectable rancher. I'm working in a boarding house. I have no family, I have nothing. Zachary leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. Zinnia, I didn't write to you because of your father's name or his money. I wrote because your first letter was smart and funny and honest. You asked real questions about what it meant to build a life in California, about whether the land could ever really belong to us, or if we just borrowed it for a while. You quoted Shakespeare, and then made a joke about whether Hamlet would have survived a week on a cattle ranch. I liked you, the you in those letters. Nothing about what's happened changes that. My father cast me aside for loving a stranger, Zinnia said, the words bitter in her mouth. For even thinking about loving someone he didn't choose. Zachary's smile returned, softer this time. Then love me out loud, he said. Don't hide it, don't apologize for it. If you think there might be something between us worth exploring, then do it without shame. Your father doesn't get to control who you care about. Mrs. Chen returned with coffee, strong and black, and Zinnia wrapped her hands around the cup, needing something to hold on to. I don't know you, she said quietly. Not really. 6 months of letters doesn't mean I know who you are. That's true, Zachary agreed. So let me stay in San Francisco for a while. Let me court you proper, the way I would have if we'd met at a church social or a barn dance. Let me take you for walks, buy you dinner, talk to you face to face. And if after that you decide there's nothing here, I'll go back to my ranch and we'll part as friends. What about your ranch? Who's taking care of it? I have a hired hand, name of Miguel Santos. Good man, knows cattle better than I do. He can manage for a few weeks. Zachary took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. Unless you want me to leave now. No, Zinnia said quickly, perhaps too quickly because Zachary's smile widened. No, I'd like you to stay. I'd like to know you, the real you, not just the man in the letters. So Zachary Keene took up residence in a small hotel near the Embarcadero, and for the next 3 weeks, he courted Zinnia Keller with a determination and creativity that surprised her. He met her after her work was done each day, appearing in Mrs. Chen's sitting room with flowers bought from a street vendor, with small gifts that showed he remembered things from her letters, a book of Keats' poetry, a ribbon the exact blue of a dress she'd once described. They walked through San Francisco's streets as the city transformed from day to night, gas lamps flickering to life, the sounds of the docks giving way to music from saloons and restaurants. He told her about his life, and it was nothing like the comfortable existence she'd known. He'd come west in 1876, barely 18, after his parents died of typhoid in Ohio. He'd worked as a ranch hand for 6 years, learning everything he could, saving every penny until he had enough to buy a small piece of land in the Sacramento Valley. It's not much, he admitted as they sat on a bench overlooking the bay one evening, the wind carrying the salt smell of the ocean. 200 acres, a house that's barely more than a cabin, a barn that needs repair. But it's mine. I built it with my own hands, and every morning when I wake up and look out at that land, I know I'm working for myself, building something that'll last. Tell me what it looks like, Zinnia said, watching his face as he talked. Rolling hills, gold in the summer when the grass dries out, green in the winter when the rains come. Oak trees scattered across the landscape like someone planted them deliberate, even though they grew wild. In the spring, wildflowers cover everything, lupine and poppies and Indian paintbrush. The Sierra Nevada mountains are visible on clear days, snow-capped even in summer. There's a creek that runs through the property, never goes completely dry even in drought years. That's why I bought that particular piece of land. Water means life out there. It sounds beautiful, Zinnia said softly. It is, Zachary agreed. It's also hard and lonely, and some days I wonder what the hell I'm doing out there by myself. That's why I answered your advertisement. I wanted someone to talk to, someone who understood that California is not just gold and opportunity. It's also work and uncertainty, and trying to figure out if you're building something real or just fooling yourself. Zinnia turned to look at him, this man who had ridden 2 days to see if she was all right, who spent his evenings walking her through the city and his days waiting for her work to finish. What do you want, Zachary? What are you hoping for? He met her gaze steadily. Honestly, I'm hoping you'll come back to the ranch with me. I'm hoping we'll get married and build a life together. I'm hoping that in 10 years we'll have a house full of kids and a herd of cattle, and you'll still want to talk to me about books and philosophy, and whether we're doing right by the land. But I know that's a lot to ask of someone you've only known in person for 3 weeks. It is a lot to ask, Zinnia said, her heart racing. It's asking me to leave the only city I've ever known to go live in the middle of nowhere with a man who's essentially a stranger. I know. It's asking me to trust that you're who you seem to be, that you won't turn out to be someone different once we're married, and I'm stuck on a ranch miles from anywhere. I know that too. Zinnia took a deep breath. My father told me I was cast aside for loving a stranger. But the truth is, I feel like I knew you better after reading your letters than I knew any of the men he wanted me to marry. You shared your thoughts, your fears, your dreams. Those men only ever talked about their business dealings and their expectations for a wife. They never asked what I wanted. What do you want, Zinnia? Zachary asked quietly. She looked out at the bay, at the ships moving in the twilight, at the city she'd lived in all her life. I want something real. I want a partnership, not a transaction. I want someone who sees me as an equal, not as property or decoration. I want to work beside someone building something, even if it's hard. I want to love out loud the way you said. No more hiding, no more apologizing for what I feel. Then come with me, Zachary said, reaching for her hand. His palm was calloused from work, warm and strong. Marry me. Not because your father chose me or because society says you should. Marry me because you want to, because you think we might have something worth building. Zinnia looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between her softer skin and his work-worn fingers. She thought about the life she'd left behind, all its comfort and constraint. She thought about the letters that had sustained her through lonely months, the words that had made her feel seen and understood. She thought about the man who had ridden 2 days to make sure she was safe, who had courted her without expectation or demand. Yes, she said, and felt the words settle into her bones like truth. Yes, I'll marry you. Zachary's face transformed with joy, and he lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with sudden tears. I promise you won't regret it, he said. I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. They were married 3 days later in a small ceremony at the mission church, with Mrs. Chen and Miguel Santos, who had ridden down from the ranch to meet her, as witnesses. Zinnia wore a simple blue dress purchased with the small wages she'd saved from her weeks at the boarding house. There was no elaborate celebration, No hundreds of guests, no orchestra or champagne. Just the priest's words joining them together, and Zachary's eyes on hers as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the priest said, and Zachary kissed her, gentle and brief, a promise of more to come. Mrs. Chen hugged her afterward, pressing a small bag into her hands. "A wedding gift," she said. "Some tea, some dried fruit, some practical things for starting a household. You're a good girl, Zinnia. You work hard and you don't complain. That man of yours is lucky to have you." "Thank you," Zinnia said, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for taking me in, for giving me a chance when I had nothing." "Everyone deserves a chance," Mrs. Chen said simply. "Go build your life. Be happy." They left San Francisco the next morning, Zinnia riding beside Zachary on a gentle mare he'd bought for her, their few possessions packed in saddlebags. The city fell away behind them as they rode north and east, following roads that became trails, trails that became paths through golden hills. Miguel had returned to the ranch ahead of them, giving them time alone for the journey. Zachary set an easy pace, stopping frequently to rest the horses and to show Zinnia landmarks, the winding Sacramento River, the distant peaks of the Sierras, the valley spreading out before them like a promise. They spent the first night at a small inn in Sacramento City, where Zachary paid for a private room and then stood awkwardly near the door as though unsure what to do next. Zinnia, who had been raised with strict lessons about propriety, but who had also spent 6 months reading Zachary's honest letters, crossed the room and took his hand. "We're married now," she said softly. "You don't have to be nervous." "I'm not nervous exactly," Zachary said, but his hand was shaking slightly in hers. "I just want to do right by you. I don't want to rush anything." Zinnia stood on her toes and kissed him, less brief than the kiss in the church, letting herself lean into his warmth. He responded carefully at first, then with growing confidence, his arms coming around her waist, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zinnia smiled. "I don't feel rushed," she said. That night, in a small room with moonlight streaming through the window, they began to learn each other in ways letters could never teach. Zachary was gentle and patient, checking in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. His touch was reverent, like she was something precious, and when they finally came together, Zinnia felt a sense of rightness that erased any lingering doubts about her decision. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, she felt him press a kiss to her temple. "I love you," he said quietly. "I think I started loving you when you wrote that letter about how the ocean made you feel small and significant at the same time, like you were just one person, but also part of something vast and eternal. I'd never heard anyone put it like that before." "That was my 3rd letter to you," Zinnia said, remembering. "I almost didn't send it. I thought it sounded too philosophical, too strange." "It was perfect," Zachary said. "You're perfect." "I'm not perfect," Zinnia laughed softly. "I'm stubborn and opinionated, and I argued with my father constantly about things that probably didn't matter." "Good," Zachary said. "I don't want someone who just agrees with everything I say. I want a partner who'll tell me when I'm being an idiot, who'll challenge me to think differently. I want you, exactly as you are." They reached the ranch late the following afternoon, coming over a rise to see the valley spread before them, just as Zachary had described it in his letters. The house was indeed barely more than a cabin, 2 rooms built of rough-hewn timber with a stone fireplace, but it sat on a slight rise with a view that took Zinnia's breath away. The barn was larger than the house, and behind it stretched pastures where cattle grazed, perhaps 50 head, their dark shapes moving slowly through the golden grass. Miguel Santos came out to meet them, a man in his 40s with a weathered face and a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Welcome home, boss," he said to Zachary, then turned to Zinnia with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Keene, it's good to have a woman here. Maybe you can talk some sense into this stubborn fool about fixing that barn roof before winter." "The barn roof is fine," Zachary protested, but he was grinning. "It leaks," Miguel said flatly. "It'll leak worse when the rains come. But never mind, you're home now, that's what matters. I'll leave you two to settle in. I'll be in the bunkhouse if you need anything." The inside of the cabin was spare but clean, with a table Zachary had clearly built himself, chairs that didn't quite match, a bed frame covered with simple linens. There was a small kitchen area with a cast iron stove and a water pump that brought water up from a well. It was nothing like the house Zinnia had grown up in, with its multiple floors and elaborate furnishings, but as she stood in the doorway and looked around, she felt something unexpected settle in her chest. "It's home," she said softly. "It will be," Zachary said, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "We'll add on to it as we can afford to. Another room or two, a proper porch, maybe a separate kitchen someday. But for now, this is what I can offer you." Zinnia turned in his arms. "It's enough," she said firmly. "More than enough. It's honest and it's ours, and that's worth more than all the fancy houses in San Francisco." They fell into the rhythm of ranch life over the following weeks. Zinnia learned to cook on the temperamental stove, to make bread and stew and beans in ways that stretched ingredients and filled stomachs. She learned to tend the kitchen garden Miguel had planted, coaxing vegetables from the California soil. She learned to recognize the different cattle, to understand their patterns and needs. Zachary taught her to ride properly, not the side-saddle trotting she'd done in San Francisco's parks, but real riding, moving with the horse, communicating through subtle shifts of weight and pressure. She discovered muscles she didn't know she had, found herself falling into bed exhausted every night, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from meaningful work. She and Zachary fell into patterns of partnership, dividing chores by preference and ability rather than strict gender roles. She was better with numbers, so she took over the ranch's accounts, recording expenses and income in neat columns. He was better with his hands, fixing things that broke and building things they needed. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they sat on the small porch Zachary had begun building, watching the sun set over the valley and talking the way they had in their letters, about everything and nothing. He told her stories about his childhood in Ohio, about parents he'd loved and lost. She told him about growing up in her father's house, about the pressure to be perfect, to marry well, to never want anything beyond what was expected. "You miss it?" Zachary asked one evening. "The comfort, the ease," Zinnia considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss small things, hot baths whenever I wanted them, books, though I appreciate the ones you have more now because they're precious. But do I miss the life itself? No. I don't miss feeling like a possession, like my only value was in what marriage I could make. Here, I matter because of what I do, what I contribute. That's worth more than any amount of comfort." "You can write to your parents if you want," Zachary said. "Let them know you're all right, that you're happy. I wouldn't stop you." "Maybe someday," Zinnia said. "But not yet. They made their choice. They told me I was cast aside, and I accepted it. I'm building something new now, something that's mine. When I'm ready to reach back toward my past, I will. But right now, I'm focused on the future." The future arrived sooner than expected. By November, Zinnia realized her monthly courses were late, and by December she was certain. She waited to tell Zachary until she was sure, then chose a moment when they were working together in the barn, tending to a cow who was close to calving. "I'm going to have a baby," she said, her hands steady as she poured feed into a trough. Zachary froze, a bucket of water sloshing in his grip. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. My mother had 5 pregnancies, only I survived, but I remember how she was in the early months. The same things are happening to me." Zachary set down the bucket and crossed to her, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," Zinnia admitted. "Happy. Worried about the practical aspects. Excited, all of it at once." "We'll figure it out," Zachary said, kissing her forehead. "There's a midwife in the town, Mrs. Patterson. We'll get her out here as you get closer to your time. We'll add that extra room to the house, make a proper nursery. We'll do this together." The winter passed in a blur of preparation. Zachary and Miguel worked to expand the cabin, adding a second bedroom and a larger kitchen. Zinnia sewed baby clothes from fabric Zachary bought on trips to town, her fingers learning the tiny stitches required for infant garments. She felt the baby move inside her for the first time in January, a flutter like butterfly wings, and she grabbed Zachary's hand and pressed it to her stomach so he could feel it too. "That's our child," he said, his voice full of wonder. "That's really our child. Did you think I was making it up?" Zinnia teased. "No, but feeling it move makes it real in a different way." His hand stayed on her belly, feeling for another flutter. "Hello in there. This is your father. I'm looking forward to meeting you." The baby moved again, a stronger kick this time, and they both laughed. Spring came to the valley in an explosion of wildflowers, just as Zachary had described in his early letters. Lupine and poppies carpeted the hills in purple and orange, and Zinnia, now heavily pregnant, walked slowly through them, feeling the baby shift and settle inside her. She thought about her parents sometimes, wondered if her mother had loved being pregnant or merely endured it as a duty. She thought about what kind of mother she wanted to be, what kind of life she wanted to give this child growing inside her. "I want them to be free," she told Zachary one evening. "Free to choose their own path, to love who they want, to build the life they dream of. I want them to never feel like their only value is in meeting someone else's expectations." "They will be," Zachary promised. "Boy or girl, we'll raise them to think for themselves, to work hard, to be kind. That's all any parent can do." The baby came on a warm afternoon in late May, arriving with surprising speed once labor started. Mrs. Patterson arrived barely in time, and by sunset, Zinnia held a daughter in her arms, a red-faced, screaming bundle of fury and life. "She's got a set of lungs on her," Mrs. Patterson said approvingly. "Strong and healthy. You did well, Mrs. Keene." Zachary sat beside the bed, his eyes wet with tears as he looked at his daughter. "She's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name her?" Zinnia asked, exhausted but exhilarated. They had discussed names for months without settling on anything. Now, holding her daughter, Zinnia knew. "Rose," she said. "I want to name her Rose, for growing in difficult soil and thriving anyway." "Rose Keene," Zachary said, testing it. "I like it." Rose, welcome to the world. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant learning. Rose was a demanding baby, but watching her grow and change was a joy that surprised Zinnia with its intensity. She had never been particularly interested in children before, but this child, her child, was fascinating. Every smile, every new sound, every small development felt miraculous. Miguel proved to be surprisingly good with the baby, coaxing smiles from her when she was fussy and telling her stories in Spanish that she couldn't possibly understand but seemed to enjoy anyway. "I have grandchildren in Mexico," he explained when Zinnia thanked him for his help. "I miss them." "Your little one helps with that. Why don't you go visit them?" Zinnia asked. Miguel shrugged. "Maybe someday. For now, the work is here." As Rose grew into a toddler, strong-willed and curious, Zinnia found herself settling more deeply into ranch life. The initial strangeness faded, replaced by competence and confidence. She learned to read weather signs, to know when rain was coming by the behavior of the cattle and the smell of the air. She learned which plants were safe for Rose to touch and which needed to be avoided. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the seasonal patterns of breeding and calving and taking cattle to market. In the fall of 1884, when Rose was 16 months old and starting to form real words, a letter arrived addressed to Zinnia in handwriting she recognized immediately. Her mother's elegant script, unchanged despite the passage of time. Zinnia stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, her heart pounding. Zachary found her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter still sealed in her hand. "You don't have to read it if you don't want to," he said gently. "You don't owe them anything." "I know," Zinnia said, "but I think I need to know what it says." She opened it carefully and read her mother's words, written in the formal style she'd always used. "My dear Zinnia," the letter began, "I hope this letter finds you well. Your father's business associate mentioned seeing you in Sacramento Valley, married to a rancher and with a child. I wanted to reach out, despite your father's wishes, to tell you that I think of you often. Your father remains angry about what he calls your betrayal, but I have come to see things differently. You were brave to choose your own path, and I was a coward not to defend your right to do so. I don't ask for forgiveness, only for the chance to know you again and to meet my grandchild if you'll allow it. Your mother, Elizabeth Keller." Zinnia read the letter twice, then handed it to Zachary. "What do you think?" He read it carefully. "I think it's your decision. She hurt you badly when she didn't stand up for you, but she's also acknowledging that now. The question is whether you want her back in your life." Zinnia looked out the window at Rose, who was playing in the yard under Miguel's watchful eye, chasing a chicken with squeals of delight. "I want Rose to know her grandmother," she said slowly. "Not my father, I don't think I can forgive what he did, but my mother maybe. People can change. God knows I've changed. Maybe she has too." She wrote back that evening, a carefully worded letter inviting her mother to visit, making it clear that her father was not welcome, but that Zinnia was willing to begin rebuilding a relationship if her mother was sincere. The response came quickly, and 2 weeks later, Elizabeth Keller arrived at the ranch in a hired carriage, looking older and smaller than Zinnia remembered. The reunion was awkward at first, both women uncertain how to bridge the gap of 2 years and all the hurt between them. But Rose, with a toddler's lack of social awareness, broke the tension by walking directly up to this stranger and demanding, "Up." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears as she lifted her granddaughter. "She's beautiful," she said, her voice breaking. "She has your eyes, Zinnia." "She has her father's stubbornness," Zinnia said, some of the tightness in her chest easing. "Come inside. You must be tired from the journey." They talked for hours that first day, Elizabeth admitting her regrets and failings, Zinnia explaining her new life. Zachary gave them space, taking Rose outside to do chores, letting mother and daughter work through their complicated history. "Your father has become impossible," Elizabeth said at one point. "He's driven by pride and greed, and I can't stand to be around him anymore. I'm thinking of leaving him, of coming to Sacramento to open a dress shop. I have some money of my own from my family. Not much, but enough to start over." "You're really going to leave him?" Zinnia was shocked. Her mother had always seemed so passive, so resigned. "Seeing what you did, choosing your own path even when it was terrifying, it made me realize I don't have to accept the life I fell into. I'm 51 years old, Zinnia. If I'm going to have any life of my own, I need to claim it now." Elizabeth reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. You inspired me. You were so brave." "I didn't feel brave," Zinnia admitted. "I felt terrified. Some days I still do." "That's what bravery is," Elizabeth said. "Being afraid and doing it anyway." Elizabeth stayed for a week, getting to know her granddaughter and helping around the house in ways that surprised Zinnia. Her mother, who had never cooked a meal or cleaned a floor in San Francisco, rolled up her sleeves and worked alongside her daughter, learning the skills she'd never needed before. "I like it here," Elizabeth said on her last evening. "It's peaceful. You and Zachary have built something real. I'm proud of you." The words Zinnia had once desperately wanted to hear from her father came from her mother instead, and they healed something she hadn't realized was still broken. "Come back anytime," Zinnia said when her mother's carriage arrived to take her back to Sacramento. "You're always welcome here." "I will," Elizabeth promised. "And when I open my dress shop, you'll have to come visit me in Sacramento. Bring Rose. Let her see the city." Life settled into new patterns after that. Elizabeth did leave Zinnia's father, opening a modest but successful dress shop in Sacramento. She visited the ranch regularly, forming a real relationship with her daughter and granddaughter. Zinnia's father never reached out, and eventually Zinnia stopped expecting him to. His loss, she decided, not hers. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Zachary's careful management and willingness to try new approaches paid off. They increased their herd gradually, buying quality breeding stock when they could afford it. They added chickens and pigs, diversifying their income. Zinnia started a larger garden, growing vegetables they sold in town along with butter and cheese she learned to make. Rose grew into a bright, fearless child who was equally comfortable helping her father with the cattle, or sitting with her mother learning to read. Zinnia taught her daughter letters using the same books Zachary had collected, starting her education early with the same passion for learning that had led Zinnia to place that advertisement in the Chronicle so long ago. In the spring of 1887, when Rose was 4, Zinnia discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because she was stronger now, toughened by years of ranch work. Their son was born in October, a calm baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with serious dark eyes. They named him Samuel, after Zachary's father, and he completed their family in a way that felt exactly right. Rose was enchanted with her baby brother, insisting on helping with everything, and Zachary walked around with a bemused expression, as though he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked one evening, holding Samuel while Rose leaned against his side and Zinnia sat across from them darning socks. "A few years ago I was alone in this cabin, wondering if I'd spend my whole life that way. Now look at this." "We're all lucky," Zinnia said softly. "I could have married Harold Pemberton and spent my life miserable and respectable. Instead, I get this. This was a life of hard work and simple pleasures, of children's laughter and shared meals, of partnership and respect and deep abiding love. It wasn't the life anyone would have predicted for the wealthy rancher's daughter from San Francisco, but it was unmistakably hers, chosen and built with her own hands. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Rose turned into a gangly 7-year-old who could ride as well as any ranch hand, who read voraciously and asked endless questions about everything. Samuel grew into a thoughtful 5-year-old who loved animals with a passion that suggested he'd inherited his father's gift for working with cattle. In the fall of 1890, Zinnia and Zachary celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary by taking a rare day away from the ranch, riding up into the foothills of the Sierras to a spot Zachary had discovered years before. Miguel watched the children, shooing them out the door with instructions not to come back until sunset. They spread a blanket near a stream and ate the lunch Zinnia had packed, then lay side by side watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue California sky. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked. "Marrying me, coming here, all of it?" "Never," Zinnia said without hesitation. "Not even for a moment. Do you?" "Hell no," Zachary laughed. "Best decision I ever made was answering that advertisement. Second best was riding to San Francisco when I got your letter." "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Zinnia Keene." "You told me to love you out loud," Zinnia said, rolling onto her side to look at him. "To not hide it or apologize for it. I'm still doing that, you know. Every single day. I love you out loud in everything I do, every choice I make, every moment we share." Zachary pulled her close, kissing her with the practiced ease of 8 years together. 8 years of learning exactly how to make each other sigh with pleasure. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I loved you when you were just words on a page. I loved you when you opened that boarding house door looking terrified and brave at the same time. I love you now, covered in mud and children's sticky fingerprints, more beautiful than anything I could have imagined." They made love there in the foothills, with the sound of the stream rushing past and the Sierra wind sighing through the pines. It was unhurried and sweet, the lovemaking of people who knew each other's bodies intimately, who had learned over years exactly how to bring each other pleasure. Afterward, they lay tangled together in comfortable silence until Zinnia spoke. "I want to write to my father," she said. "Not to reconcile exactly. I don't think we can ever have what we had before, and honestly, I'm not sure I'd want that. But I want him to know that I'm happy, that his worst predictions didn't come true. I want him to know that loving a stranger was the best choice I ever made." "Then write to him," Zachary encouraged. "Say what you need to say." Zinnia did write, a single page that took her 3 tries to get right. She told her father about the ranch, about Zachary and their children, about the life she'd built from nothing. She didn't ask for reconciliation or forgiveness. She simply stated the facts of her existence, her happiness, her absolute lack of regret. "You told me I was cast aside for loving a stranger," she wrote in closing. "But that stranger became my husband, my partner, my dearest friend. He told me to love him out loud, to refuse to hide or apologize for what I felt. I've lived by those words for 8 years now, and they've brought me more joy than I knew was possible. I hope someday you'll understand that you didn't cast me aside. You set me free." She never received a response, and she didn't expect one. The letter was for her as much as for him, a closing of accounts, a final statement on the choices that had shaped her life. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1892, they had expanded to 400 acres, buying the neighboring property when the elderly owner passed away and his children wanted nothing to do with ranching. They built a proper house, not enormous but comfortable, with separate bedrooms for the children and a big kitchen where the family gathered for meals. They kept the original cabin as a guest house, and Elizabeth stayed there whenever she visited, which was frequently. Zinnia's mother had become a different person in her independence, running her Sacramento dress shop with surprising business acumen. She and Zinnia had repaired their relationship as much as it could be repaired, finding new ground as 2 women who had both chosen difficult paths toward freedom. In 1893, Zinnia discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise but not an unwelcome one. Rose was 11 now, Samuel 9, and the idea of another child felt like a gift. This pregnancy was harder than the others, perhaps because Zinnia was 33 now and feeling her age, or perhaps simply because every pregnancy was different. Their second daughter was born in March of 1894, arriving during a spectacular storm that turned the valley into a sea of mud. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s but still the best midwife in the county, delivered the baby with practiced efficiency while the thunder rolled overhead and Rose entertained Samuel downstairs with stories. "Another girl," Mrs. Patterson announced, cleaning the baby and wrapping her in soft blankets. "Healthy lungs, good color. Congratulations, Mrs. Keene." Zinnia held her youngest daughter this unexpected blessing and felt complete. "Lily," she said when Zachary came in, his clothes soaked from the storm, "I want to name her Lily." "Lily Keene," Zachary said, kissing his wife's forehead and then his daughter's. "Welcome to the family, little one." The children adored their baby sister. Rose, on the cusp of young womanhood, was responsible and gentle, helping with feedings and changings without being asked. Samuel was protective, appointing himself Lily's guardian and taking his duties seriously. Watching them together, Zinnia felt a fierce pride in the family they'd created, the loving environment so different from the cold formality of her own childhood. By 1895, the ranch was firmly established, known throughout the region for quality cattle and fair dealing. Zachary had a reputation as a rancher who treated his land and animals well, who paid his workers fairly and kept his word. Zinnia had become known, too, for her intelligence and business sense, for the way she could look at numbers and see patterns others missed. They were invited to serve on the town council, asked for advice by younger ranchers just starting out. Zinnia began teaching reading and arithmetic to children whose parents couldn't afford formal schooling, holding classes in the town's small church on Sundays after services. She found she loved teaching, loved watching understanding dawn on young faces, and she thought about how different her life might have been if she'd been born in an era when women could be teachers without giving up everything else. But she didn't regret the path she'd taken. She had made something meaningful here, something that mattered. She had loved out loud, refusing to hide or apologize, and that love had multiplied and spread in ways she couldn't have predicted. Rose grew into a striking young woman, confident and capable, equally comfortable discussing literature or breeding stock. She attracted attention from young men in the area, but she was in no hurry to marry, interested instead in learning everything she could about running the ranch. "I want what you and Papa have," she told Zinnia one day as they worked together in the garden. "A real partnership, someone who sees me as an equal. I'm not settling for less just because I'm expected to marry young." "Good," Zinnia said firmly. "Never settle. Wait for someone who makes you feel seen and valued. It's worth it." In the spring of 1897, Zinnia's father died. The telegram from her mother's lawyer was brief, stating only the facts and mentioning that Zinnia had been left nothing in the will, everything going to distant cousins she'd never met. She felt surprisingly little at the news, a small pang of sadness for what might have been, but no real grief. "He died as he lived," she told Zachary, "angry and controlling to the end." "Are you all right?" Zachary asked, holding her close. "I'm fine," Zinnia said honestly. "He stopped being my father the day he told me I was cast aside. You're my family now. You and the children and my mother and Miguel. That's what matters." Elizabeth came to the ranch for an extended visit after the funeral, seeming lighter without the burden of her failed marriage. She spent hours with her grandchildren, telling them stories about San Francisco and teaching Rose the finer points of fashion and deportment, skills the girl had little use for on the ranch, but enjoyed learning anyway. "You've built a good life here," Elizabeth told Zinnia one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Better than anything I could have imagined for you." "I couldn't have imagined it either," Zinnia admitted, "but I'm grateful for it every day." The turn of the century came and went, bringing changes to the valley. The railroad extended further into the region, making it easier to get cattle to market, but also bringing more people, more development. The wild isolation of the early years faded somewhat, though the ranch itself remained a haven of relative peace. Rose turned 18 in 1899, and as Zinnia watched her daughter become a woman, she thought about herself at that age, trapped in her father's house and desperate for something more. Rose had freedom Zinnia had only dreamed of, the freedom to choose her own path, to take her time deciding what she wanted from life. Samuel at 16 was quieter than his sister but no less determined, already talking about expanding the ranch's operations, about new breeding techniques he'd read about. Lily, now 5, was the baby of the family and knew it, charming everyone with her bright smile and endless energy. In the summer of 1900, Zachary and Zinnia celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary. They'd grown older together, Zachary's hair now streaked with silver, Zinnia's face lined from years of sun and wind. But when she looked at him, she still saw the man who had ridden 2 days to see if she was all right, who had offered her partnership and respect when the world had offered her nothing. 18 years, Zachary marveled as they sat together on the porch of the house they'd built. Sometimes it feels like yesterday we were getting married in that little church. Sometimes it feels like we've always been together. Both are true, Zinnia said, her hand in his. Every moment has been worth it. Every challenge, every triumph, every ordinary day. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, Zinnia said, because they're what made us strong. When my father cast me aside, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But really, I'd just been set free to find what actually mattered. Which is? Zachary asked, though he knew the answer. This, Zinnia said, gesturing to encompass not just the house but everything beyond it, the land they'd worked, the children they'd raised, the life they'd built from nothing but hope and determination. Love that doesn't hide, love that exists out loud, love that builds and creates and sustains. That's what matters. Rose found love herself in 1901, meeting a young veterinarian who came to the ranch to treat a sick horse and stayed for dinner at Zinnia's insistence. His name was Thomas Wright, and he was everything Zinnia could have hoped for her daughter. Kind and intelligent and clearly smitten from the moment Rose expressed knowledgeable opinions about cattle diseases. Their courtship was proper but enthusiastic, and they married in the spring of 1902 in a ceremony much larger than Zinnia and Zachary's had been. The whole town came, testament to the respect the Keene family had earned over the years. Elizabeth made Rose's dress, a beautiful creation of silk and lace, and Zachary walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. "I'm not losing her," he said to Zinnia afterward. "Thomas is going to join the ranch. They'll build a house on the east pasture, but it still feels like everything's changing." "Everything is always changing," Zinnia said gently. "That's life. But the important things, the love and respect and partnership we've built, those remain constant." Rose and Thomas did build their house, and within a year, Zinnia became a grandmother, holding Rose's daughter with the same wonder she'd felt holding her own children. The cycle continued, love multiplying and spreading through the generations. Samuel married in 1904, bringing home a school teacher named Margaret who was as steady and thoughtful as he was. They settled in the ranch's original cabin, now renovated and expanded, and began their own family. Lily, growing into a spirited teenager, declared she was never getting married and was going to be a famous author instead, plans that changed approximately weekly. By 1905, the ranch was truly a family operation, spanning 3 generations and 4 households. Zachary and Zinnia had become the patriarch and matriarch, dispensing advice and settling disputes, but mostly just watching with satisfaction as their children and grandchildren carried on the work they'd started. Miguel had finally retired, though he still came around frequently to visit and offer unsolicited opinions on how things should be done. Elizabeth, now in her 70s, had sold her dress shop and moved permanently to the ranch, occupying a room in the main house and helping with the grandchildren who adored their storytelling grandmother. On quiet evenings, Zinnia and Zachary still sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the valley that had been their home for more than 2 decades. Their hands were gnarled now from years of work, their bodies creaky with age, but the connection between them was as strong as ever. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in Mrs. Chen's boarding house?" Zinnia asked one evening in the fall of 1905. "When I told you my father had cast me aside, I said if you wanted to love a stranger, then love me out loud," Zachary said, his memory still sharp despite the years. "Best advice anyone ever gave me," Zinnia said softly, "because that's what I've done every day since. I've loved you out loud, proudly, without shame or hesitation, and look what it gave us." She gestured to the ranch spread before them, golden in the evening light. Smoke rose from the chimneys of Rose and Thomas's house, Samuel and Margaret's cabin. Grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. The cattle moved slowly through the pastures, the land itself seeming peaceful and content. "We built this," Zachary said, his voice full of quiet pride. "From nothing, from letters and hope and stubbornness, we built all of this." "We built it together," Zinnia corrected. "That was always the point. Not wealth or status or meeting expectations, but partnership. Building something real with someone who saw me as an equal." "I'm a lucky man," Zachary said, lifting her hand to his lips, a gesture he'd made thousands of times over their years together, but which still made her heart flutter. "We're both lucky," Zinnia said. "Lucky that I was brave enough to place that advertisement. Lucky that you were lonely enough to answer it. Lucky that when everything fell apart we found each other anyway." "Not luck," Zachary disagreed gently. "Choice. You chose to write those letters. You chose to leave your father's house. You chose to marry me even though it meant giving up everything you'd known. Those were all choices, acts of courage." "Then I choose this still," Zinnia said, leaning into his warmth. "Every day I choose you, choose us, choose this life we've built. I'll keep choosing it until the day I die." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night familiar and comforting. In the distance, someone called children in for dinner. A horse whinnied softly. The wind rustled through the oak trees that had been there long before they arrived and would be there long after they left. Zinnia thought about the frightened young woman who had walked out of her father's house with nothing but letters and hope. She thought about the boarding house room, the fear and uncertainty, the moment when Zachary had appeared like something out of a dream and offered her not rescue but partnership. She thought about every choice that had led her to this moment, this place, this life. "No regrets," she said softly, more to herself than to Zachary. "Not a single one," he agreed, hearing her anyway. The years continued their steady march. Lily eventually did marry, though not until she was 25 and had published several short stories in San Francisco magazines. Her husband was a journalist who appreciated her wit and intelligence, and they settled in Sacramento, close enough to visit frequently. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren, the family tree spreading and branching in ways that delighted Zinnia. Zachary's health began to fail in 1912, his heart weakening despite his stubborn determination to keep working. Zinnia nursed him through his final months with the same fierce devotion she'd brought to everything else in their life together. They were 52 and 54, not ancient but worn down by decades of hard living. On a clear morning in June, with wildflowers blooming across the valley, just as they had every spring since they'd arrived, Zachary died in their bed with Zinnia holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," and hers were, "I know. I've always known." The grief was devastating, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. But even in the depths of it, Zinnia didn't regret anything. They'd had 30 years together, 30 years of partnership and love and building something that would outlast them both. That was more than many people got, more than she'd had any right to expect when she walked out of her father's house with nothing. She scattered some of his ashes in the foothills where they'd celebrated their 8th anniversary, kept the rest in an urn in their bedroom. She continued to run the ranch with her children's help, refusing to be diminished by her loss. Zachary wouldn't have wanted her to give up, to fade away. He'd want her to keep living, keep loving out loud, keep building. Zinnia lived another 15 years, watching her grandchildren grow and have children of their own, watching the ranch continue to evolve and prosper. She wrote her memoirs in those years, telling the story of a woman who had been cast aside for loving a stranger and who had built an empire of love in response. She died peacefully in her sleep in 1927, at the age of 67, in the house she and Zachary had built. Her family buried her ashes next to his in the little cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, under a stone that read simply, "Zinnia Keene, 1860–1927. She loved out loud." The ranch continued through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But they all knew where it had started, with letters between strangers, with a woman brave enough to choose her own path, with a man who saw her worth when her own father couldn't. They told the story to their children, who told it to theirs, keeping alive the memory of love that refused to hide, that built something lasting from nothing but hope and determination. Rose's granddaughter, researching family history in the 1960s, found the original letters between Zinnia and Zachary, carefully preserved in a trunk in the attic. She read them with tears streaming down her face, these artifacts of a love story that had shaped her entire family. The letters were honest and hopeful and full of longing, two people reaching across distance to find connection. The last letter in the collection was one Zinnia had written but never sent, dated a few days before Zachary died. In it, she'd written, "30 years ago, you told me to love you out loud. I've done that every day since, and I'll keep doing it even after you're gone, because that kind of love doesn't end with death. It echoes through generations, shapes lives not yet lived, creates ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. Thank you for teaching me what real love looks like. Thank you for being my partner, my friend, my home. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. I'll love you out loud forever." And she had. The ranch was still there, still in the family, still thriving. The land Zinnia and Zachary had worked was now tended by their great-great-grandchildren. The values they'd instilled, partnership and respect and courageous love, lived on in everyone who came after them. Sometimes, on clear evenings when the sun set over the Sacramento Valley in shades of gold and orange, people claimed they could feel something in the air, some lingering presence of love so strong it had soaked into the very soil. The wildflowers still bloomed every spring, lupine and poppies covering the hills in purple and orange, a reminder that beauty grows even in difficult places. The original cabin still stood, converted now into a small museum of family history. Visitors could see Zinnia's letters, her carefully kept account books, photographs of the family through the generations. They could read the story of a woman who had been cast aside for loving a stranger and who had transformed that exile into freedom, building a legacy that would last for generations. In the end, Zinnia Keene got exactly what she'd hoped for when she placed that advertisement in the San Francisco Chronicle so many years ago. A life of meaning, partnership, and love that didn't hide. She'd been brave when it mattered, chosen love over comfort, built something real from nothing but determination and hope. She'd loved out loud, and that love had changed everything.